Hi, Dr. Ariane from the Movement Paradigm. Have you been dealing with some type of chronic health condition, autoimmune disease, even something like skin issues or sinus issues that just don't seem to be resolving? Well, today we're going to talk about 5 different categories of inflammatory triggers that you should consider exploring if you're experiencing any or all of these things. So we want to remember that 90% of all chronic health conditions are associated with excessive or persistent inflammation. So what is inflammation? We want to think of inflammation as our normal defense and repair mechanism. It's actually a really great thing that we have that. If we take, for example, an acute injury such as an ankle sprain, when we sprain our ankle, we will have swelling, we have pain, we may have redness, we may have loss of motion. All of this is exactly what's supposed to happen. In that first 4 to 5 days is our normal inflammatory process. We bring white blood cells to the area to help the area heal. However, if let's say, for example, we have poor sleep and we have a lot of stress and we're eating inflammatory foods, then this could lead to more systemic inflammation. It could lead to a loss of tolerance where the ankle just doesn't seem to be getting better. Now all of a sudden we have shoulder pain, or now we get a cold. So when things keep jumping around from one to the next and it just seems like you have bad luck, that's a perfect example of more systemic inflammation. And so that's when we want to look a little bit deeper to figure out what those things are. And so there are essentially, if we want to simplify this in terms of your exploration, you can look at 5 different categories of potentially inflammatory triggers. Number 1 is food. So of course, this is one of the most common areas, and it's also the easiest to explore. So we have essentially 14 different potentially inflammatory foods that are more common, such as gluten, dairy, corn, soy, peanuts, etc. We also have different foods and food properties that you could be sensitive to, something like histamines or oxalates or nightshades. So there are a lot of different categories of foods that could be potentially inflammatory, but I always like to start with some of the basics. The 2 most common inflammatory foods for people, potentially inflammatory, can be gluten and dairy. So that's always a really, really good starting point of assessing if those are an issue for you. We do want to remember with food that there's 3 different types of adverse food reactions. So we have an allergy, we have a food sensitivity, and we also have a food intolerance. So any or all of these can contribute to essentially some type of inflammatory process in the body. So we really want to investigate what those are for you. Number 2 are bugs. So this could be something like a tick, so a tick-borne illness. That could be a parasite. So we can see that on a stool test. So if there is some kind of underlying infection that we are not aware of, this could be exacerbating a lot of your potential symptoms. So if you are evaluating all of the things that are causing your inflammation, we definitely want to at least keep this in mind as a possibility. If you've been traveling overseas, you've been traveling to other countries, and so on, we just want to factor that into a potential root cause. Number 3 are toxins. So we have internal toxins and we have external toxins. So we are exposed to an exorbitant amount of toxins on a daily basis. So that could be things from cleaning chemicals to plastic water bottles to mold exposure to the list is endless. So essentially, we are always exposed to toxins, but we can also have internal toxins. So any type of infection, whether that's a yeast infection, that's a bacterial infection, all of these things can also contribute to acting as a toxin to our body. Of course, things that we might be ingesting, like alcohol, is also a toxin. So in this category, we can make the assumption that we are all exposed to them. It may be to a different level for each person, and everyone's ability to detoxify is unique. This is going to be based on a genetic predisposition. This could be based on their early childhood exposure, their lifetime exposure to toxins. So we want to keep that in mind, where one person could be surrounded by smoke and mold their whole life and not have an issue, and another person might have cancer and autoimmune disease and not be able to get out of bed. So we want to really respect and appreciate the differences, the individual differences between people. Number 4 is trauma. So as it relates to trauma, we can have previous childhood trauma, we can have emotional trauma, physical trauma, chemical trauma, ongoing stress. So all of these things can be explored, and really this is, to me, one of the most important aspects of addressing inflammation. We know that ongoing stress, for example, can shift the colonization of the bacteria of the gut. So this can cause dysbiosis. This can cause ongoing inflammation. And we want to remember that our gut is 70% of our immune system. So when we're talking about immune health and we're talking about inflammation, we have to talk about gut health. And last but not least are hormones. So this can range from a whole host of issues, from thyroid issues to sex steroid issues, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, insulin, ghrelin, leptin, how we're able to, how hungry we are, how satiated we are. So there's so many aspects from a hormonal standpoint as it relates to our endocrine system. To give an example, if we have a thyroid issue and we're eating inflammatory foods and we're stressed and we are exposed to toxins, then we will likely have a greater inflammatory response. So again, we want to appreciate that the more of these things that are happening, the more likely something might, express itself, or potentially, from a symptomology perspective, it might make things worse. So as you begin to explore your own health, really try to take these factors into consideration. This is not a, end all be all list, but I do think it really helps to get an idea of what might be driving some of your symptoms, and also where to begin to explore and attack that so you can feel your best. So if this was helpful, make sure you give it a like, give it a share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, of course, The Movement Paradigm, for weekly tips on mindset, nutrition, movement. If you would like to make an appointment with us, we see people all over the world, so please make sure to reach out, and we would love to set up a discovery session so that we can help you feel your best.